The depot had no power, but every time a freight train passed, something inside the wall began tapping.
Naomi Reed deleted the first 43 seconds of the interview, then stopped with her finger above the key that would empty the computer's trash. On the screen, the discarded file was only a name and a gray waveform. She had recorded the retired orchard worker 6 months ago, before Rain returned to the Willamette Valley before the man's breathing worsened, and his daughter began asking when she might hear the finished piece. Naomi had edited the opening so many times that she knew each chair creak and swallowed breath by sight. The voice itself had become harder to face. She closed the window without restoring the file. Her apartment held the dry electrical warmth of an overworked baseboard heater. Beyond the glass, October rain silvered the roofs of Salem and turned the alley below into a dark channel. A payment notice lay beneath her audio interface, 12 days overdue. Her checking balance was $463. Her phone vibrated against the desk. Ruth Calder introduced herself as chair of the Alder Creek Historical Committee. Her voice had the careful pace of someone reading from notes she had revised more than once. "We need a condition record of our railroad depot," she said. "Exterior, interior, room tone, anything you believe should be preserved." Naomi looked at the frozen waveform on her monitor. For restoration, there was a pause, short but complete. For demolition, the contractor would arrive the following Monday. The committee had 7 days to document a building it had failed for years to save. They could pay $1,850 half when Naomi collected the key half upon delivery. Naomi asked for photographs before answering. Ruth sent 6. The depot sagged beneath a broad, moss-heavy roof. One gutter had folded away from the eaves, leaving a black water stain down the siding. Ivy entered a broken freight room window, and the raised platform leaned at its southern corner as though the earth had lowered one shoulder beneath it. The last photograph showed the ticket office. Its bay window faced an active rail line, but the room behind it was empty except for a narrow counter and a rectangle of cleaner wood where instruments had once hung. Naomi enlarged that rectangle until the image broke into pixels. 11 months earlier, her younger brother Eli had left a voice message after they argued about their mother's storage unit. She had seen his name, turned the phone face down, and waited 2 days to listen. By then, a rain-slick curve south of Eugene had settled the argument without either of them winning it. The message remained unheard since the funeral. Naomi had accepted work that did not require people to speak culvert resonance for an environmental survey room tone for a museum application. The groan of a timber bridge before repairs. Buildings did not ask why she had waited. "I can be there this afternoon," she told Ruth. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Rain followed Naomi west from Salem in long gray bands. Her silver headphones rode in the passenger's seat beside a canvas field bag, the left hinge wrapped in black cloth tape. She wore a charcoal rain shell, a rust-colored wool cap, and boots still marked with pale clay from a recording job beside the Santiam River. Alder Creek appeared as a hardware store, a church steeple, and 2 rows of wet. Naomi Reed deleted the first 11 seconds of the interview, then stopped with her finger resting on the key. On her monitor, the remaining waveform began with a woman drawing breath. The next sound should have been a name, followed by the story of a farmhouse lost to a reservoir in 1963. Naomi had heard the account 4 times. She had adjusted the levels, removed the refrigerator hum, and marked the places where the woman's sleeve brushed the microphone. She still could not make herself listen to the end. The deleted audio waited in the computer's trash. Naomi closed the editing program without emptying it. Rain pressed softly against the single window of her Salem apartment. A red warning on her desk said the payment for her field recorder was 12 days overdue. Beside it lay a pair of silver headphones with black cloth tape wrapped around the left hinge. She put them into her canvas bag as her phone began vibrating. "Naomi, it's Ruth Calder," the caller said. "Lenora Vale gave me your number. She said you document old buildings." "I document people connected to old buildings. That may be what we need, although we don't know it yet." Ruth represented the Historical Committee of Alder Creek, a town 14 miles west of Salem. Its abandoned railroad depot was scheduled for demolition the following Monday. The committee wanted a final audiovisual record: exterior, elevations interior, measurements, room, tone, operating sounds if any survived, and interviews with residents who remembered the station. "There are no operating sounds," Ruth said. "The power was disconnected years ago." Naomi looked at the unfinished waveform on her darkened screen. "How many interviews?" "As few as necessary. I know this is short notice." The contract paid $1,850. Half would be available when Naomi arrived, the remainder when she delivered the archive. After rent and equipment payments, she had $463 left in her account. "When do you need me?" "Today." Naomi opened the file drawer beneath her desk and took out a blank condition sheet. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. By noon, the rain had settled into a fine gray veil over the Willamette Valley. Naomi drove west through fields flattened by October weather, her equipment cases secured behind the passenger seat. At a stoplight outside Salem, her phone connected itself to the car speakers. One unheard message appeared on the display. Her brother had sent it 11 months earlier, 2 days before a truck crossed the center line on a rain-dark highway. Naomi had seen the notification when it arrived. They had argued that morning, and she had decided to let him wait. 2 days became the final distance between them. She touched the steering wheel control before the message could begin. The screen returned to the map. Alder Creek consisted of a feed store, a post office, 2 blocks of wet storefronts, and a water tower whose painted name had faded to pale blue shadows. The depot stood beyond them beside a gravel access road overgrown at its edges. The active freight line ran farther east, separated from the old platform by blackberry canes and a strip of brown grass. Naomi parked facing the building and remained in the car long enough to study it through the windshield. The depot was longer than it first appeared, its broad roof sinking slightly above the freight room. Moss lay thick along the shingles. One gutter had twisted away from the eaves, spilling rain down the siding in a dark, vertical stain. At the south end, the floor had settled until the waiting room doorway no longer looked square. A raised platform followed the trackside wall, but its far corner leaned toward the rails as though trying to leave without the rest of the building. A woman in a yellow raincoat emerged from beneath the eave. She carried a ring with one large brass key. Naomi. Ruth Calder was 67, silver-haired, and smaller than her voice had suggested. Rain shone on her shoulders. She offered the key with both hands. "The first $925 has been transferred," she said. "I wish I could tell you this work might save it, but it won't." Ruth looked toward the failed gutter. "The demolition contract is signed. Monday morning, 8 o'clock. What you make will probably be all that remains." The brass key was cold and unexpectedly heavy. Naomi fitted it into the west door, but Ruth stopped her before she turned it. Sam Ortega, the building inspector, marked 2 unsafe sections inside. "Don't cross, red tape, and don't step onto the east end of the freight platform. Part of the sill has gone soft." Naomi nodded. "Any active water or gas?" "None. Animals. A raccoon last spring. Wasps in summer. Electrical service. Disconnected at the pole." Ruth drew the hood of her raincoat closer around her face. "I'll come back tomorrow with the old floor plan. Call if you need anything." Naomi unlocked the depot alone. The door dragged across warped floorboards, releasing the smell of wet fur plaster dust and something faintly mineral from the cold brick chimney. Her flashlight found a band of red tape stretched across the south waiting room. Beyond it, a brown watermark widened down the wall beneath the leaking roof. She did not enter. She photographed the threshold, marked its position on her sheet, and moved north. The main waiting room held a cast-iron stove on a brick pad. The stove door hung open, and a single maple leaf had blown inside it. Past the waiting room stood the ticket office, its bay window projecting toward the tracks. A wooden counter shutter had been left halfway raised. One side hung lower than the other, but Naomi did not touch it. She continued through a narrow baggage room and stopped where red tape blocked the freight room floor. Rain ticked against a metal bucket somewhere in the darkness, each drop arriving just late enough to resist becoming a rhythm. By 4, she had photographed the safe rooms and measured the accessible walls. At dusk, she returned to the ticket office to record a baseline. She set a matched pair of microphones at ear height, angled them away from the broken window, and connected them to her recorder at 24-bit 96 kilohertz. The higher sampling rate was unnecessary for ordinary speech, but useful when she needed to separate faint mechanical noise from rain, wind, or insect movement. Naomi closed her eyes and listened through the taped headphones. The depot held more sound than its emptiness suggested. Water touched the bucket in the baggage room. Wind worried a loose edge of flashing above the chimney. The damp boards beneath her boots released small compressive creaks whenever she shifted her weight. Far away, a crossing signal began its paired metallic warning. Then the rails started to sing. The note came through the ground before the train appeared, a thin, rising pressure transmitted through steel gravel and timber. Naomi opened her eyes. Beyond the bay window, a freight locomotive emerged from the rain, its headlights sliding across the abandoned platform. The building trembled. Something clicked inside the wall. Naomi turned toward the ticket counter. There were 5 sharp sounds, a pause, then 3 more. They had the dry metallic attack of a telegraph sounder, but the old instrument shelf was empty. No cable entered the wall. The electrical panel was dead. She removed one headphone cup. The sound continued without amplification. 2 irregular bursts coming from behind the plaster beside the crooked. Naomi stretched a measuring tape across the waiting room floor while rain fell into a numbered bucket behind her. 27 feet 4 inches, she said into her recorder. She photographed both ends of the tape before retracting it. The depot's floor plan would need to distinguish what remained square from what only appeared so. Along the south wall, the baseboard descended nearly an inch before disappearing behind red safety tape. Above it, water had softened the plaster into the color of weak coffee. Naomi marked the damage on a sketch south sill visible settlement. Roof leak above. No access. By 9, Tuesday morning, 6 collection buckets stood beneath separate leaks. She numbered each one with blue painter's tape and recorded the rate of water entry. The task was not part of Ruth's original request, but uncontrolled water changed a building from 1 hour to the next. A final record made without noting that change would be a portrait pretending not to see the illness. The west door scraped open. A broad-shouldered man in a navy work jacket stepped inside, wiping his boots before crossing the threshold. A folding ruler protruded from one pocket. He checked the red tape before acknowledging Naomi. Sam Ortega, building inspector. Naomi Reed. You stayed out of the marked sections. I photographed them from the safe side. Sam examined her damage sketch. He tapped one notation with a square-cut fingernail. The south sill isn't just settled. It's decayed for almost 9 feet. 2 floor joists have lost bearing. 10, vibration from the railroad, reach the ticket office through them. It reaches everything here. That doesn't make a noise important. I didn't say it was important. No, Ruth did. Sam crossed to the nearest bucket and looked up at the stained ceiling. He was not dismissing her, Naomi realized. He was separating evidence from hope because someone in town had already confused the two. The committee thinks anything unusual might stop demolition, he said. A sound won't. We would need material evidence of historic significance followed by a review. Even then, this building has lead paint mold, a failing platform, and no compliant utilities. What's behind the ticket office wall? Studs, plaster, and 70 years of bad decisions. Any active wiring. The meter was removed in 2018. Water lines, never in that section. Animals. Sam considered it. Mice could get inside the wall. Not anything large enough to make the plaster move. He walked toward the baggage room. At its threshold, one floorboard flexed beneath his boot. He returned with a fir plank from beside the freight door, tested it for soundness, and laid it across the weak section. Use that until I mark a wider exclusion zone, he said. The action took less than a minute. He did not mention it again. Together, they mapped the remaining rooms. South of the ticket office were the 2 waiting rooms divided by a wall whose doorway had lost its door. North of the office, a narrow records closet opened toward the baggage room. Beyond that, the freight room occupied nearly a third of the depot's 86-foot length. The raised platform ran along the east side beneath the deep roof eave. Through the freight room window, Naomi could see its outer corner leaning away from the building. "Don't go out there," Sam said. "One support pier has rotated and the ledger board is pulling loose." Naomi photographed it through the glass. Moss softened the platform's edges, but beneath it, she could see blackened end grain where water had entered the timber. At 10:30, Ruth arrived carrying a cardboard tube and followed an older man with a walnut cane. The man paused inside the doorway listening before he introduced himself. "Arthur Bell," he said, "Signal Department, 38 years. Ruth told you about the clicking. She told everyone who would answer a phone." Ruth set the cardboard tube on the ticket counter. Arthur maintained railroad signals from Eugene to Portland. "If there was telegraph equipment here, he'll know." Arthur removed his rain-spotted cap. His hair had flattened into a white ring around his head. Knowing what used to be in a depot isn't the same as knowing what's still inside one. Naomi unrolled the floor plan. It was a 1956 railroad drawing, copied so many times that its dimensions had blurred. The ticket office bay faced east, giving the agent a clear view along the track. A narrow rectangle on the office wall was labeled Instrument Shelf. Thin lines descended from it into a conduit routed beneath the floor. "The telegraph wires didn't run through the section where I heard the sound," Naomi said. "Not on this plan," Arthur replied. "But the ticket shutter had counterweights. Those usually traveled inside wall chases." He stood before the crooked shutter without touching it. One side remained several inches lower than the other. "Two weights?" Naomi asked. "Normally. One for each side depending on how this was framed." Only a single dark chain was visible through the narrow gap above the counter. Arthur leaned close, then stepped back. "Don't open anything yet. Old plaster can be held together by habit." They waited for the 11:15 local freight listed on Naomi's timetable. She placed her stereo microphones in the same position as the previous night and marked the plaster at 3 heights with removable tape. Arthur sat near the stove, both hands resting on his cane. Sam remained in the baggage room doorway. The train announced itself as a faint rail hum. 4 locomotives passed, followed by 12 empty flat cars. The windows trembled. The loose chimney flashing gave one metallic shiver. The wall did not click. Ruth looked toward Naomi. Was that train too small? Maybe. Or yesterday's sound had another cause. Naomi played the recording through her headphones. The low frequencies were strong enough to move the floor, but there were no sharp impacts above them. She logged the result rather than explaining it away. Arthur gave a slight nod. A missing sound is still a measurement. After lunch, Naomi inspected the exterior from the gravel road. She traced the old cable entry point beneath the ticket bay, then followed the siding north. No branch touched the wall. No loose pipe entered the office. When she returned inside, Sam had extended the exclusion tape across the weakest baggage room boards. At 4:13, a westbound freight appeared on the railway schedule. The train was nearly a mile long, hauling covered grain cars and loaded lumber flats. Naomi placed a directional microphone toward the ticket wall and attached no equipment to the plaster itself. She wanted first to prove that the sound repeated before testing how it traveled. The locomotive passed. A deep vibration rose through the pier foundation and fur frame. The counter shutter quivered. 3 metallic clicks struck inside the wall. A pause followed. Then came 4 faster impacts and 1 isolated tap. Arthur lifted his head. "Sounder?" Naomi asked. "Something hitting one, perhaps. A telegraph sounder has a hard, close click. But there's no reason for one to be working." As the freight cars continued, Naomi watched a loose pencil roll across the counter and stop against the lower end of the shutter. The clicks did not follow a stable rhythm. They arrived when the heaviest loaded cars crossed the section of rail nearest the depot. "Not Morse," Arthur said, "at least not any message." Naomi noted the exact time. "Mechanical movement." "That would be my first answer. And your second." Arthur's mouth shifted without quite becoming a smile. "More mechanical movement." Ruth exhaled, though whether from relief or disappointment Naomi could not tell. When they left, the rain had strengthened. Naomi remained in the ticket office, transferring the day's files to her laptop. She aligned the morning train recording beneath the afternoon one. Both showed rail vibration, but only the loaded freight carried the thin vertical peaks of the clicks. Outside, darkness filled the space between the depot and the tracks. On her laptop, 3 time-stamped waveforms glowed against the black screen, each one preserving a sound the empty building had not been expected to make. Naomi pressed a contact microphone against the first of 6 blue marks on the ticket office wall. The small metal disc did not listen to the room. It listened to the plaster, converting minute surface movement into an electrical signal. In her left headphone, rain filled the depot with a distant hiss. In her right, transmitted through the contact microphone, each drop became a dull force passing from roof to stud. She recorded 10 seconds, moved the disc 12 inches, and repeated the test. Arthur sat at the ticket counter with the 1956 floor plan beneath his hands. Sam stood in the records closet doorway watching Naomi's cable so no one stepped across it. "Strongest point?" Arthur asked. "Beside the lower end of the shutter." Naomi marked the plaster with another piece of removable tape. "The vibration weakens toward the floor. Whatever moved yesterday is probably attached to the chase not lying at the bottom." It was Wednesday morning. 5 days remained before demolition. Naomi mounted a directional microphone 3 feet from the wall, then connected both microphones to separate channels. If the clicking returned, one track would capture the airborne sound, and the other would show how it traveled through the framing. Arthur examined the ticket shutter. It was a paneled oak screen designed to close the transaction window after the station agent balanced the day's receipts. A dark chain rose from each side, but on the west end only 3 links remained visible before the chain vanished behind a narrow vertical strip of oak. "This strip doesn't match the rest of the trim," Naomi said. "It matches," Arthur replied, "just not in age." The inspection piece had been cut from old-growth oak, but its tool marks were finer than those on the original counter. One screw head lay beneath several layers of brown paint. The strip appeared fixed until Naomi illuminated it from the side and saw a narrow shadow along its right edge. Sam crouched without crossing the damaged floor. "You are not opening that because the wood looks interesting." "No," Naomi said. "We're documenting why it may need to be opened." She photographed the strip with a scale beside it. Arthur measured the shutter and compared it with the plan. The drawing showed 2 counterweights descending through parallel chases. The visible eastern chain tightened when he lifted that end of the shutter 1/2 inch. The western side barely moved. "Broken chain or missing weight," he said. "If something fell inside, train vibration could make it strike the framing." "That accounts for movement," Naomi said, "not the sounder tone. You heard something shaped like a sounder. We haven't earned the noun yet." At 11 the rails began humming. Naomi started both recorders as a loaded southbound freight approached. The building took the first vibration through its foundation piers. On her display, the contact microphone traced a thickening line. The shutter trembled. A sharp click entered both channels. Naomi held up one finger. 3 more impacts followed. The directional microphone captured their heart attack. The contact microphone showed a lower pulse immediately before each one. Arthur leaned toward the wall but did not touch it. "There's a loose length of chain. Something at the end is striking metal." The last cars passed and the signal disappeared. Naomi replayed the 2 channels. Slowed down, each event began with a broad movement through the timber. A narrower transient followed a fraction of a second later. "Structure moves first," she said. "Metal responds second." Sam looked at the oak strip. "If I authorize limited inspection, what comes off?" "1 screw," Arthur said. "Possibly the strip, no plaster. And if it resists, we stop." Sam photographed the wall with his own tablet. He recorded the existing cracks, entered the reason for inspection, and called the municipal office to attach the images to his report. Only then did he sign a 1-page authorization. Arthur cleaned the paint from the screw head with a wooden pick. Beneath it was brass countersunk flush into the oak. He tried raising the shutter, but the western side dragged. 14 inches should clear the stop, he said. "Hold the good side. Don't force the other one." Naomi braced the eastern edge with both hands while Arthur lifted the crooked end. At 14 inches, the remaining chain slackened. The shutter stayed in place. Arthur fitted a screwdriver into the brass head and turned slowly. The screw emerged without bringing paint or wood with it. He placed it in a paper tray and pressed one finger against the left edge of the oak strip. Nothing happened. He shifted pressure lower. The strip pivoted outward on 2 steel pins concealed along its opposite edge. Cold air breathed from the opening. Naomi directed her flashlight into the narrow chase. A sash weight hung on the eastern side as expected. Beside it, the broken western chain descended loosely over a compact metal frame fixed to the inner stud. The frame held 2 upright coils and a hinged steel arm. Arthur let out a quiet breath. Now we've earned it. A telegraph sounder. An old one. Someone mounted it inside the chase. The broken chain rested against the sounder's arm. When Arthur touched the shutter, the chain shifted and produced the same dry click captured in Naomi's recordings. "There's your message," he said. "Gravity and a freight schedule." No current had awakened the instrument. No forgotten operator was sending words through the wall. Heavy cars vibrated the platform ledger and floor frame. That movement traveled into the ticket office stud, setting the loose chain in motion against the steel arm. The explanation diminished nothing. Naomi found its survival more affecting because it required no invention. A practical machine, hidden by practical carpentry, had continued making the one sound its materials allowed. She raised her recorder, but a shadow below the sounder stopped her. Arthur moved the light down. Behind the chain, wedged between the chase and the record's closet wall, lay a parcel wrapped in gray cloth. It was perhaps 16 inches long and 4 inches thick. A faded cord crossed it twice. Beneath one corner, Naomi could see the pale edge of folded paper. No one reached inside. Sam stepped closer. Could it have fallen from above? Arthur directed the beam along the cavity. Dust lay evenly on the ledge except for the rectangular area beneath the bundle. It was placed there. The sounder may have kept the chain from crushing it. Naomi photographed the parcel through the opening first without a scale, and then with one held against the trim. She recorded the time, the names of everyone present, and the exact position of the shutter. Ruth arrived 20 minutes later. Her wet yellow coat brought the smell of rain into the office. She looked through the opening and covered her mouth with one hand. "Can we take it out?" "Not yet," Naomi said. The cloth showed dark tide marks along its lower edge. If the papers inside were damp, lifting the bundle without support could split them under their own weight. Removing it also changed the discovery site. They needed someone qualified to control both problems. Ruth called the county archive. Mina Cho reached the depot at 2:14 carrying 2 flat archival boxes and a hard plastic case. She was 38, with close-cropped black hair and green nitrile gloves tucked into the chest pocket of her jacket. Before examining the opening, she read Naomi's discovery notes from the beginning. "Who touched the package?" "No one," Sam said. "Who opened the wall?" "Arthur, under my authorization." "Good. Keep telling me boring things." Mina established a clean work surface on the ticket counter. She covered it with an inert polyethylene sheet, then placed blotter paper and a rigid support board on top. Naomi photographed each stage while Sam continued the custody log. The cavity was too narrow for Mina to grasp the package safely. Arthur removed no additional historic material. Instead, he held the loose chain aside with a padded wooden wedge while Mina slid a thin archival board beneath the cloth bundle. It resisted halfway out. "Stop," she said. A loop of cord had caught around the sounder's mounting bracket. Naomi directed the flashlight while Mina freed it with a blunt microspatula. The cord released without breaking. The parcel emerged with a fine layer of gray dust. Mina lowered it onto the support board. She did not untie the cord. First, she photographed all 6 visible surfaces, measured the cloth, and checked for active mold. The dampness appeared old, but the contents would need controlled separation. Something narrow had slipped between 2 folds of cloth. Mina eased it free without opening the main bundle. It was a curled strip of yellow telegraph paper no wider than 2 fingers. Pencil marks had faded across its surface. Mina placed it beneath a sheet of clear archival film so it could relax without being pressed flat. Several initials were visible, followed by 5 carefully written words. "Keep their names together." Ruth read the sentence once and stepped away from the table. Sam looked toward the dark opening in the wall, then at the bundle, as of whom. Mina closed the archival box around the supported parcel. "That," she said, "is the next question, not today's answer." And the sounder arm answering in hard metallic taps. A sound could survive long after the person who made it, Lenora had once told her, but someone still had to listen. On the counter, the yellow message strip rested beneath archival film while the freight vibration faded from the rails. Mina Cho slid a micro spatula beneath the softened flap of the envelope. The paper had spent the night inside a humidity chamber at the county archive where moisture entered slowly through the air rather than touching the fibers directly. Its brittle folds had relaxed enough to open, but Mina still moved as though the envelope might remember every year it had been bent. Naomi watched through the glass partition of the temporary treatment room. Sam stood beside her, his navy work jacket folded over one arm. Arthur and Ruth waited at the far end of the table where the depot's 1945 freight ledger lay open beneath weighted strips of archival film. It was Thursday afternoon. The cloth bundle had contained 47 telegraph message strips, 3 payroll sheets, 12 typed testimony pages, 9 photographs, a hand-drawn route map, and an envelope holding 23 corrected names. Mina had also recovered brass telegraph key, a compact sounder, and a red carpenter's pencil worn nearly to its metal band. None of the objects was valuable in the way auction catalogs used the word. Together, however, they described a system of lives. The railroad payroll sheets identified temporary employees by abbreviated names, misspellings, and worker numbers. The testimony pages supplied details the company records omitted: a preferred surname, a child waiting in another state, an injured hand, a room rented behind a cannery, or the name of the person who should be contacted if a worker failed to return. Mina lifted the envelope flap. Inside was a 6-page letter dated November 18, 1946. The signature, at the end, read, Clara Mercer, night clerk, Alder Creek Station. Naomi positioned a camera above the first page while Mina read silently. Only after each sheet had been photographed did she begin aloud. Clara had taken the night position in 1943, when experienced railroad men were scarce and women were assigned work previously closed to them. Alder Creek received seasonal cannery laborers, track crews, and agricultural families, moving between temporary jobs. Mexican-American and indigenous workers often arrived under names entered incorrectly by distant payroll offices. Some were recorded only by initials or numbers. Clara began keeping corrections because messages failed to reach families. A worker named Mateo Ortega had been listed on one sheet as M. Ortega and on another only as T2188. When he injured his shoulder unloading machinery, the depot received 3 telegrams intended for him. None was delivered until Clara matched the number to the name he used. She started asking every temporary worker to state a full name, its correct spelling, and the person who should receive word in an emergency. Her notes grew into a parallel record. They told her to discard it, Ruth said. Mina continued reading. In October 1946, a regional supervisor ordered temporary labor papers removed from the station files because the storage cabinets were needed for current freight accounts. Clara did not accuse him of hatred or fraud. Her letter acknowledged that much of the railroad operated through hurried handwriting, reused forms, and instructions issued by people who never met the workers affected by them. But she could not accept that administrative convenience was reason enough for names to disappear. She made duplicate message strips. She copied payroll corrections in red pencil. She recorded food deliveries quietly organized for families whose wages had been delayed. The hand-drawn map showed the Cannery Road 3 labor camps and farmhouses where stranded workers had been given meals or shelter. The depot had not concealed a crime or a fortune. It had concealed proof that people had noticed one another. Clara's final paragraph was brief. She did not know who might open the packet or whether the station would still be standing. She asked only that the records remain together until the names could be checked against families, church registers, tribal records, and local memory. Separating the papers, she wrote, would return each person to the same fragmentary state she had tried to correct. Mina lowered the final sheet. No one spoke until Sam pointed toward one of the photographs. 9 workers stood beside a freight cart beneath the depot eave. Rain had silvered the background. The man at the far left wore a canvas cap and held his injured arm close to his body. Then I see the back. Mina turned the photograph without lifting it from its support. 7 names appeared in Clara's red pencil. The first was Mateo Ortega. Sam took out his wallet and removed a photograph protected by a cloudy plastic sleeve. It showed the same man 20 years older standing beside an apricot tree with one hand resting on a boy's shoulder. My mother kept this, Sam said. She said Mateo worked for the railroad for a while. We could never find him in the employment records. Mina compared the ear's jawline and scar above the right eyebrow. She did not announce a conclusion. Do you have other dated photographs? 2, maybe 3. We'll document them independently. Family identification matters, but we keep the verification steps visible. Sam nodded. He placed his photograph beside the archival support without allowing the two objects to touch. Naomi recorded the comparison and watched the audio levels respond to their quiet voices. Until then, she had treated careful listening as a way to avoid doing harm. Clara's pages exposed the limit of that belief. Listening was not passive when someone had trusted the future to hear accurately. Mina assembled the evidence for an emergency significance statement. The dates on the message strips matched the railroad forms. The freight ledger confirmed train movements and cannery shipments. Clara's map identified routes visible in county records. Sam's family photograph offered a possible independent match. The collection could not prove that every corrected name was accurate. It proved that Clara had made a sustained contemporary effort to preserve them. At 5:30, Sam opened the building report on his tablet. The depot remains unsafe, he said. These records don't repair a sill or remove lead paint. No one is asking you to say they do, Naomi replied. He studied the image of his grandfather for another moment. I can recommend a controlled delay for documentary review and material recovery. That gives the council a reason to hear the case. It doesn't require me to pretend the building is sound. His signature appeared at the bottom of the report. Ruth called the town clerk from the hallway. An emergency municipal hearing was scheduled for Saturday morning, 48 hours before the demolition crew was due to arrive. The contract itself remained active. After the others left, Naomi stayed while Mina returned Clara's letter to its temporary housing. Rain traveled softly along the archive windows, too light to hide the machinery of the climate control system. Naomi placed her phone on the table and opened Eli's message. This time she pressed play. Hey, Nay, I know you're mad. I found that awful coffee you like, so I'm calling it a peace offering. Call when you want. No rush. A car door closed in the background. Eli took a breath as though he might add something, then ended the message. There was no final confession and no wisdom arranged for the person left behind. He had expected another ordinary conversation. Naomi had been the one to turn his words into a sealed room. The message did not forgive her because it had never accused her. It simply remained what it had always been, 19 seconds of her brother expecting time. Naomi locked neither the screen nor the memory away. She left the phone beside Clara's open letter while Mina dimmed the treatment room lights. Before sunrise on Friday, Naomi carried a sheet of corrugated roofing across the wet gravel. A dozen volunteers had arrived in work gloves and rain jackets, but Sam admitted only 4 of them beyond the safety fence. He established an exclusion zone beneath the damaged eave, checked every ladder, and prohibited anyone from stepping onto the moss-covered roof. No heroics, he said. We're controlling water for 72 hours, not restoring the building before breakfast. A roofing contractor worked from a secured lift sliding temporary membrane beneath the failed flashing. Below him, Ruth knelt beside the depot with both arms inside a blocked downspout. She removed a compacted mass of leaves, moss, and pigeon feathers, then flushed the pipe until brown water ran freely into a gravel channel. Naomi labeled salvaged gutter brackets at a table beyond the drip line. Between tasks, she recorded names and short descriptions of the work being done. She captured the scrape of a wooden tool clearing a gutter seam, the measured strike of a mallet seeding, temporary flashing, and the first clean rush of rainwater entering the downspout. Inside, Sam replaced the scattered buckets with 2 controlled drain lines. Plastic sheeting protected the ticket office wall without trapping moisture against the plaster. Mina's collection remained at the county archive, safely removed from the changing humidity. Ruth climbed down from the ladder with mud darkening her knees. We held bake sales for curtains 10 years ago, she said. Never raised enough for the roof. Curtains are easier to imagine, Naomi replied. So is regret. Ruth picked up the next clogged section of gutter and carried it outside. By noon, rain no longer fell through the waiting room ceiling. Water followed the repaired channel, entered the downspout, and struck the gravel beyond the foundation. The sound was ordinary and continuous. For the first time in years, the building was shedding rain instead of keeping it. Naomi placed one speaker and 3 authenticated document copies on a folding table in the Alder Creek Council Room. Saturday's hearing drew fewer than 40 people. There were no television cameras and no crowd pressed against the doors. The demolition contractor sat in the back row with a scheduling calendar open on his knee. Sam occupied the first chair beside the town clerk, his inspection report bound in a gray folder. Naomi played 17 seconds from her depot recording. Low rail vibration filled the room. Then came the dry clicks of the chain striking the concealed sounder. She stopped the file before curiosity could replace evidence. The sound was mechanical, she said. It led us to a protected wall cavity. It was not a coded message. Mina explained the collection's dates, physical order, and relationship to the freight ledger. She used no names that had not been verified. 2 local families described relatives who had passed through Alder Creek during the wartime labor years, though neither claimed a connection to Clara's papers yet. Sam spoke last. The south sill is decayed, 2 joists have lost bearing, and the east platform is unsafe. Lead and mold testing remain incomplete. Historic significance does not make those conditions disappear. He opened his report to the signed recommendation. But demolition on Monday would prevent a controlled structural review and could destroy context still present in the ticket office. I recommend a 90-day suspension. The contractor raised one practical objection. His crew and machinery had been scheduled elsewhere after Monday, and a delay would cost him 2 working days. The council agreed to compensate the documented scheduling loss from its contingency fund. No one made him the enemy of a history he had not known existed. After 40 minutes of discussion, the council voted 4-1 to suspend demolition until January 24. The building was not saved. The town had purchased time to determine whether saving it was possible. Outside the council room, Ruth drew a pencil line through October 27 on the committee calendar. She did not erase the date. 3 weeks later, Sam pushed an awl into the south sill. The point entered the wood to the handle. A temporary containment barrier enclosed the work area. Hazard testing had confirmed lead in the exterior paint and localized mold beneath the waiting room leak. Licensed workers removed contaminated plaster under negative air pressure, their respirators turning conversation into gestures. The damage beneath the wall was narrower than Sam had feared, but deeper than Ruth had hoped. Arthur selected a length of reclaimed, old-growth Douglas fir donated from a dismantled warehouse. He ran his hand along one face, reading the grain before marking the cuts. Surface checks run with the weather, he told 2 younger volunteers. Structural splits keep traveling when the load changes. Learn which one you're looking at before you condemn a timber. The carpenters supported the wall on cribbing and temporary posts. They removed only the failed portion of sill, cutting long angled scarfs into soundwood at both ends. The pale replacement fitted the old frame without pretending to be original. 2 compromised joists were sistered with FEAR members bolted beside them. At the freight platform, temporary diagonal braces transferred the load away from the rotated pier. Naomi stayed beyond the controlled zones. She numbered every siding board removed for access and entered its condition into a salvage table. When a worker handed her a short piece of rotten sill, it crumbled at one corner beneath her glove. She had once believed preservation meant keeping an object untouched. The depot was teaching her otherwise. Refusing to remove failed material would not honor the building. It would ask soundwood to carry decay until both were lost. At dusk, Sam removed one temporary post and watched the repaired sill take the load. The joint held without movement. New fear met old beneath the wall, its clean grain left visible for anyone willing to look. On a cold December morning, a surveyor drove the first orange stake into municipal land beside the Alder Creek Rail Trail. The depot's existing parcel was too narrow for an accessible entrance drainage work and a safe public setback from the active line. Its foundation piers had also settled unevenly toward the old platform. Repairing the structure in place would cost nearly as much as moving it and still leave the town with an unusable site. The proposed ground lay 6/10 of a mile north. From there, the ticket bay could continue facing the railroad, while remaining beyond the modern safety boundary. A shallow swale would direct winter water away from the new foundation. The abandoned road beside the trail provided enough width for a slow building move once utility clearances were confirmed. Ruth unfolded the preliminary budget on the hood of Sam's truck. Emergency stabilization had cost $9,600. The relocation estimate was $46,000. Completing the first restoration phase foundation, roof siding, windows, utilities, environmental controls, and accessible entry would bring the total close to $117,000. No single source could cover it. Mina wrote the archive room requirements into a county heritage grant. The Rail Trail Board requested improvement funds for the accessible approach. A regional carpenters union offered supervised volunteer hours, and a mill outside Dallas donated compatible fir. Small checks arrived with notes identifying grandparents who had worked in canneries, orchards, and track gangs. Naomi contributed her measured drawings, recordings, and photographs. When Ruth suggested listing her among the cash donors, she shook her head. "I gave work," Naomi said. "Write down what it actually was." Her original documentation contract had ended, but she continued recording planning meetings under a modest archival services agreement. The work did not rescue her finances or silence her grief. It gave her a reason to keep Tuesday and Thursday afternoons open. In January, the Heritage Grant covered the archive systems and part of the foundation. The rail trail allocation paid for drainage and access. Donations closed enough of the remaining gap for the council to approve the move, provided the structure passed a final lift inspection. Naomi stood at the new site while the surveyor measured the depot's footprint. Behind them, a freight train moved through bare trees, its sound softened by distance. "Ticket office will be there," he said. Naomi looked along the marked rectangle. It held no walls, yet only wet grass and the possibility of weight. An orange survey ribbon moved in the wind where the depot's ticket bay would face the track. Workers slayed the first steel beam beneath the depot before dawn. The building had been cross-braced from corner to corner. Its repaired windows were covered with fitted plywood. The freight doors were bolted against movement, and every loose interior object had been removed or secured. Masons had photographed and numbered the bricks before dismantling the chimney above the roofline. The lower stack remained supported inside the frame. Hydraulic jacks stood on cribbing at 8 calculated points. At Arthur's signal, the operators lifted the depot half an inch. Sam walked the perimeter with a flashlight, checking the repaired sill, the platform connections, and each temporary brace. No joint had opened. The crew raised the structure again, repeating the inspection after every increment until transport beams could pass beneath the floor. By sunrise, the depot rested on a multi-axle trailer. Naomi walked beside it as the truck eased onto the abandoned access road. Her recorder captured tire rubber pressing, wet gravel steel chains tightening, and old fir adjusting to a kind of travel it had never been built to make. The movement was quieter than demolition would have been. There was no splintering roof or collapsing plaster. Only the low engine and occasional instructions passed between workers. A small line of residents watched from outside the controlled route. No one surged forward. Ruth held the brass depot key in one hand, although there was no door she could safely unlock. Utility crews had raised 2 communication lines and removed a roadside sign. At the narrowest turn, the driver advanced by inches, while a spotter watched the freight platform clear a cedar tree. Naomi stopped recording long enough to place her palm against one timber brace. The depot was moving, but it was not being taken away. At the new site, Arthur waited beside the foundation with his walnut cane planted in the mud. The truck aligned the ticket bay toward the active railroad. Jacks lifted the building from the trailer and lowered it onto its new supports, one measured fraction at a time. When the final steel beam came free, morning light touched the empty instrument shelf. Naomi pulled a corroded square nail from a numbered siding board and placed it in a labeled tray. Spring work began at the roof. Carpenters removed the failing composition layer, retained sound cedar shingles beneath it where possible, and rebuilt only those sections damaged beyond reuse. New flashing sealed the chimney, its numbered bricks were returned. Gutters received proper outlets, each leading water toward the drainage swale instead of the foundation. Only when the building was dry did work descend to the walls. Paint analysis revealed a muted ochre beneath decades of gray and white. Ruth briefly considered a brighter color that might attract visitors from the trail, then set the sample aside. "It shouldn't have to shout to prove we saved it," she said. The crew repaired original sash windows with new cords and linseed oil putty. Missing siding was milled from donated fur and dated discreetly on its reverse. Weathered boards remained weathered. Nail holes, freight cart scars, and the shallow groove beneath the ticket window were cleaned but not erased. Naomi learned to bed glass without forcing the pain. Her first line of putty was uneven. Arthur handed her the knife again rather than correcting it himself. "Tool flatter," he said. "Let the edge establish the angle." On the second attempt, the putty formed a clean slope against the glass. By June, the freight doors rolled on repaired hardware. The waiting room windows closed without rattling. When a train passed, its reflection crossed the panes in one long band while the frames remained steady. Naomi adjusted the microphone for an elderly woman named Elena Ruiz. "Say your mother's name as she said it," Naomi told her. Elena leaned toward the microphone. "Josefina Marisol Ruiz." The railroad paper left out Marisol, and they wrote Ruiz with an S. On the monitor, Mina added the pronunciation to an authority record without altering the original document. Clara's spelling appeared beside the company version, followed by Elena's correction and the evidence supporting it. Families handled facsimiles, never the fragile originals. A name remained marked uncertain when memories conflicted. Recordings could be restricted or withdrawn, and no voice entered the public listening room without written permission. Sam came after closing with his mother's photographs. He sat before the microphone but looked toward Mateo's image instead of Naomi. "We knew he hurt his shoulder," he said. "We didn't know where." After that, he avoided lifting his right arm above his head. "I thought it was from the orchard." He paused. "For most of my life, the only railroad record I could find was a number that might have been his." Naomi left the silence intact. It belonged to his account, not to her editing. A podcast producer later offered to build a series around the messages in the wall. He wanted exclusive access, a dramatic recreation, and an episode asking whether Clara's sounder had somehow transmitted a final code. Naomi declined. The recordings stayed with the county archive. Lossless masters were stored in two separate systems, while public copies carried consent terms, dates, and clear descriptions of what remained unverified. On the collection screen, 23 corrected names appeared in a single column. Beside those, authorized for public listening was a small speaker icon. Naomi selected Elena's recording. For the first time in the surviving record, Josefina's full name entered the room in her daughter's voice. Arthur mounted the conserved telegraph sounder behind a removable clear panel. The original chain had been secured so it could no longer strike the mechanism during passing trains. A low-voltage actuator reproduced one click when a visitor pressed a brass button, while Arthur's recorded voice explained how an electromagnetic sounder once translated electrical pulses into mechanical movement. The exhibit did not suggest that Clara had transmitted a hidden message. A diagram showed the actual sequence freight vibration entered the timber frame. The broken counterweight chain began to move and the chain struck the sounder arm. The truth needed no ghost. The oak inspection strip returned to its original position on concealed pins. Its brass screw remained visible to anyone who looked closely. Beside it, photographs showed the cloth parcel in place before removal. In the freight room, insulated archival storage maintained stable temperature and humidity. The waiting room received a fire detection system, accessible exits, and listening stations built from plain fir. A gently sloped path connected the west entrance to the rail trail. Mina approved facsimiles for display. Clara's original letter would remain protected at the county archive, brought out only under controlled conditions. On the morning of the occupancy inspection, Sam tested every exit, measured the accessible route, checked the alarm panel, and examined the platform railing. He signed the certificate without ceremony. Arthur pressed the exhibit button. One clean click sounded behind the transparent panel. He replaced the oak strip, tightened the small brass screw by hand, and closed the old service cavity flush with the wall. 1 year after she had first entered the depot, Naomi turned the brass key in its restored west door. The October morning was damp enough to darken the boards of the accessible ramp. Ochre paint protected the siding without concealing its age. Beneath the trackside eave, repaired freight cart scars remained visible as shallow lines across the platform. Naomi stepped into this waiting room and paused before switching on the lights. Every empty building possessed a morning voice. The restored depot held the faint circulation of its archive system. Rain, touching new gutters and furboards settling after the night's cold. None of the sounds asked to be mistaken for mystery. She started the listening stations and checked their volume. Clara's letter appeared as a facsimile beneath low light, accompanied by a note explaining where the original was stored and why it was not permanently displayed. The names occupied an entire wall, but they were not presented as a completed monument. Some entries included photographs and family recordings. Others carried careful statements spelling probable identity, not yet independently confirmed, or family contact still sought. At 9, Ruth arrived with a box of clean cloths and began wiping rain from the entrance rail. "You know we have volunteers for that," Naomi said. "I'm a volunteer." Ruth had become treasurer of the small depot trust. Most of her work involved utility bills, maintenance schedules, and grant reports, tasks less visible than saving a building and more necessary to keeping one. Arthur's recorded explanation began in the ticket office. His dry voice described coils current and the difference between a telegraph key and a sounder. A child pressed the exhibit button twice. Arthur's voice responded once is sufficient to understand the mechanism. The child withdrew her hand with grave obedience. Naomi heard Arthur chuckle from the waiting room where he sat with his cane resting across his knees. Sam arrived with his 12-year-old niece. He led her to the photograph of Mateo beside the freight cart. "That's your great-great-grandfather," he said. The girl listened to Sam's oral history, then selected Elena Ruiz's recording. When it ended, she read the names aloud under her breath. Sam noticed Mateo's photograph hanging slightly lower on one side. He raised a hand to correct it, checked the level printed into the exhibit frame, and let the photograph remain where it was. The caption was accurate. The building no longer required him to make every line perfect. At noon, Naomi signed her part-time curator agreement at the old ticket counter. The wage was modest and the schedule left room for independent assignments. She would maintain the digital collection record, new family histories, and train volunteers to document uncertainty rather than smoothing it away. The job did not return the life she had lived before Eli died. She no longer expected work to perform that kind of repair. His voice message remained on her private phone, excluded from the public archive. Some records belonged to a community. Others belonged within the unfinished boundaries of one life. After the visitors left, Naomi sat at the ticket counter with her field recorder. She opened a new file and spoke without a script. "October 20th, she said. 1 year since I first recorded this room. Rain moved along the windows. I used to think preserving a voice meant preventing it from leaving. That isn't possible. What we can preserve is the chance for someone else to hear it accurately." She stopped to consider deleting the sentence and continued instead. "I miss you, Eli. I'm learning not to turn that into a punishment." Naomi saved the file. She did not name it final. At dusk, Sam collected his niece, Arthur buttoned his coat, and Ruth switched off the listening stations one at a time. Their voices moved toward the west door, followed by the brass lock settling into place. Naomi remained in the ticket office. Wet windows. She raised the oak counter shutter, then lowered it to 14 inches, the exact position that had released the tension from the old chain a year earlier. The secured mechanism no longer answered the train by accident. One soft click came from behind the preserved wall. In the waiting room, a delayed audio program began playing the voices of families who had chosen to leave their shelter without asking one another to disappear.